I don't know when the forest started calling to me. It might have been the silence, or the wind, or maybe the way the trees stood like listening figures, tall and still, always waiting. I didn't go out there to find anything. Not really. I went to be alone. I rented the cabin in late autumn, before the snow began to fall. It was small, tucked between two ridges of pine-covered hills, down an unmarked path that wasn't on any map. The man who owned it, a retired park ranger named Ellis, told me the GPS wouldn't work out there. He said to follow the moss. The moss, he explained, grew on the left side of the trail. Always left. Even if you turned around. He said it with a look I didn't understand at the time. I drove up early in the morning, the sky still dim and the mist low on the road. There were no signs once I left the main highway, just trees, endless trees. I found the cabin just after noon. It was quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. No traffic, no phones, no voices, just wind in the needles, just time stretching out like fog. The cabin was simple. A single room with a stove, a bed, and a wood-burning fireplace. The windows were old, with thick glass that distorted the trees outside like reflections in moving water. There was no electricity. That was the point. I unpacked slowly, put my notebooks on the table, my camera by the door. I had brought too much, but I didn't mind. That first night, I slept deeply, deeper than I had in months, and I dreamed soft grey dreams of walking through the trees, following a sound I couldn't quite hear, like someone calling my name from far away. The next morning, I woke to silence again, a kind silence. I stepped outside and looked at the line of pines that began just beyond the clearing. The trunks were straight and dark. Their shadows made shapes on the ground, long arms, bent fingers. It didn't frighten me. It felt familiar. I walked a little into the woods, just far enough to let the cabin disappear behind me. That's when I noticed something strange. The moss. It was growing thick and soft on the left side of the trees. All of them, no matter which way I turned, the moss remained on the left. I thought of Ellis, the ranger, and his quiet voice when he said it. Always left, even if you turn around. That night, I lit a fire and listened to it crackle. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the cabin in gentle waves. I heard something then, not words, just a sound, like a whisper carried through the branches. I turned my head toward the window. Nothing, just shadows. Still, I found myself whispering back. I don't remember what I said. Something soft. Something like, I'm listening. And then the forest went still again, like it was thinking. The days passed slowly. I walked the woods each morning. The trail I followed seemed to shift just slightly. Not enough to alarm me, just enough to feel different. Like the forest was folding itself, gently, around me. I kept seeing the moss, always on the left. And I started noticing something else. The trees had marks on them. Thin, carved lines, almost like runes, but broken and finished. Some looked like tally marks, some like spirals. They weren't there the first day. Or maybe they were, and I hadn't seen them. I never heard animals. No birds, no insects, only wind. I started writing things I didn't remember thinking. Little fragments, sentences like, it's waiting below the roots. Follow the sound of breath, not footsteps. Don't look at the trees too long. I would find these notes in my journal in the morning, written in my handwriting, but I didn't remember writing them. Wasn't afraid. Not exactly, but I stopped locking the door at night. It felt rude, somehow, like I was a guest, and something was hosting me. On the 5th day, I woke up just before dawn. The sky outside the window was pale blue, almost white, and the trees were still. Too still. I listened for the wind. It wasn't there. There was no sound at all. No rustle of branches, no groan of wood. Not even the soft popping of the fireplace. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your skin. I sat up slowly, careful not to make noise, though I didn't know why. And then, just outside the window, I saw something move. A flicker. A tall shape between the trees, gone the moment I turned my head. I told myself it was a shadow or fog, but the stillness remained. I made tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and opened the journal I kept by the bed. The last page had writing I didn't remember. Again, it read, "The trees remember what you forget. Listen long enough, and they will speak." The handwriting was mine, but it wasn't the way I usually write. It was slower, more careful, as if I had written it while half asleep, or not quite awake. I stared at it for a while, my fingers warming against the cup. Then I closed the book and stepped outside. The forest had changed, not visibly, not in any way I could point to, but it felt different. The pines looked the same, tall and dark, spaced like cathedral pillars. The moss still grew on the left, but now there was something beneath the silence, not a sound, but the suggestion of one, like holding your breath in a room where someone has just spoken. I followed the trail deeper than I had before. The sunlight barely touched the forest floor. Everything was green, brown, and grey. And then I saw the circle. It wasn't made by human hands, at least not recently. 12 stones, perfectly placed, in a wide ring beneath a gap in the trees. Nothing grew in the center, no grass, no needles. Just bare earth, dark and clean, as if it had been swept. I didn't step into it, not out of fear. It just felt private, like a memory not meant for me. I stood at the edge and listened. Stillness. Then a low sound, a hum, too low to be a voice, too steady to be the wind. I turned slowly. Nothing. But when I looked back at the circle, there was something in the center, a pinnacle, fresh, still closed. It hadn't been there before, and I didn't see or hear it fall. I left it there. I don't know why. It felt like a gift or an invitation, and I wasn't ready to answer. I walked back to the cabin, slower this time, feeling the forest watching, not in a hostile way, just attentive, like it was waiting to see what I would do next. At night, I didn't light a fire. I sat in the dark and listened to the trees breathe. There was a rhythm to it, a slow inhale and exhale of wind, not regular, not human, but alive. When I closed my eyes, I saw the ring of stones again. This time, something stood beside it, tall, thin. Not a person, but not a shadow either. It had no face, only a suggestion of one, like mist shaped into memory. It didn't speak, but I heard something. "Do you remember me?" The voice wasn't outside, it was inside my mind, like the forest was using my own thoughts to speak. I whispered back, "I don't know," and the forest sighed, soft, slow, sad. When I woke, my hands were dirty, as if I'd been digging or touching the ground. I checked the door, it was still locked. The floor was clean, but there was pine sap on my fingertips, and in the pocket of my coat, I found something small and heavy. It was the pine cone, the one from the circle, except now it was open. Its seeds were gone. I didn't go back to the circle that day. I sat at the table and wrote for hours words that came like water through a crack. Most of it made no sense. Fragments of images, old names I didn't recognize. The hollow tree remembers what you buried. You stepped in twice and came out once. There was another you, once, before the hush. I stopped writing when I realized I was crying, ... Not hard, just slow, quiet tears I didn't feel until they touched the page. At night, I dreamed I was walking through the forest in snow, but it wasn't winter. The snow was falling from the branches, not the sky, like the trees were shedding something soft and white. And beneath each flake, I saw whisper-tiny, fluttering phrases. I tried to catch one. When I did, it melted in my palm, and the word inside was, stay. I woke to the sound of rain, not the harsh, drumming kind. This was soft, like fingertips brushing gently across the roof, a kind of hush that made the whole world feel held. I stayed in bed longer than usual, not because I was tired, but because the stillness felt sacred, like the forest was giving me space to remember something I hadn't thought of in a very long time. And I did remember something, not clearly, not all at once, just a flicker. Me, as a child, standing beneath a tree that felt impossibly large. There was something carved into it, a symbol, and a voice behind me saying, "You promised not to come back." I got dressed slowly, wrapped myself in my old coat, and stepped out into the mist. Everything was soaked, glistening, quiet. The moss shone silver. Pine needles clung to my boots like threads. I didn't choose where I walked. My feet moved on their own, like they were tracing a memory that hadn't caught up with my mind yet. And before long, I saw it, the hollow tree. It was massive, older than the others. Its bark was dark, cracked like a dried riverbed, and at its base there was a wide split-in opening just big enough for someone to crawl inside. I didn't remember walking here, but I wasn't surprised. Some part of me had known exactly where it was. I stepped closer. The air smelled like wet earth and old things. Inside the hollow, it was dark, completely dark, but not empty. There were marks on the inner walls, thin carvings, spirals and lines, some too faint to see clearly. I reached out, touched one with my fingertips. It felt warm, and then without warning, I remembered a name, not mine, someone else's, Thorn. It echoed in my mind like a bell, quiet but certain. I didn't know who Thorn was, but I had said that name before, whispered it into bark, written it in the dirt. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the trees sway slowly under the weight of the mist. The pinnacone I found was on the table, still open. Its edges glistened as if damp with sap, though I hadn't touched it in days. ... I lit a candle. The flame didn't flicker. I turned to a blank page in the journal and wrote, "The forest is not haunting me. It is remembering me." At some point, I must have dozed off, because I dreamed again. But this time, it was daylight in the dream. A strange, grey daylight, like just before a storm. I was walking with someone, tall, quiet, face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat made of woven pine needles. They didn't speak, but their presence felt familiar, not comforting, exactly, but known. We passed trees that bled white sap. We stepped over a stream that hummed like a distant voice. And then we came to a small stone marker, half buried, covered in moss, ... The figure beside me knelt and touched it. And then, finally, they spoke. Their voice was a dry whisper, like wind scraping bone. "You planted it here. Do you remember what it grew? I shook my head in the dream, and the forest sighed again. When I woke, I was cold. The fire had gone out. The candle was still burning, barely ... There was a line in my journal I hadn't written. Return to where the seed was lost. I closed the book and looked out the window. The fog was thicker than I'd ever seen it. The forest had vanished into white, but I knew exactly where I had to go ... I packed nothing. Just slipped on my coat and stepped into the fog like stepping into sleep. The trail didn't appear, but I didn't need it. My body moved like it had done this before, hundreds of times ... thousands. And then I saw the circle of stones again. Only now it had changed. The pinnacone was gone. In its place, something small was growing, a sprout. Bright green, impossibly vivid against the black soil, and beside it, something carved into the earth. You were the first to listen. I knelt beside it, unsure of what to feel. The sprout trembled slightly in the breeze, though the air was still. And suddenly, I knew what it was. It wasn't a pine tree, not anymore. It was something else. Something made from memory, from words, from silence. A piece of the forest, grown from what I had forgotten, and the forest had kept it safe. When I stood, I felt the presence again, behind me. Tall, still. I didn't turn around this time. Instead, I whispered, "I remember you now." The wind stirred gently, moving through the trees like a sigh of relief ... And the forest whispered back, "Then you can stay." After I left the circle, I didn't go back to the cabin right away. I walked, not to anywhere in particular, just deeper. The forest was vast, and it was changing. The trees weren't spaced the same anymore. They leaned in closer, their branches touching like hands clasped in secret. And beneath my feet, the path felt softer like old fabric or ash. There were no sounds now, not even wind, only the rhythm of my breath and the faint echo of footsteps that sometimes didn't feel like mine. At some point, I found myself back at the hollow tree, though I hadn't meant to return. But this time, there was something waiting just outside the opening. A bundle wrapped in old, faded cloth, tied with pine needles, twisted like thread. I hesitated, then knelt. The fabric was damp. When I opened it, I found a journal, not mine. The pages were yellowed, edges curled from moisture. The cover was cracked leather. No name, but when I flipped to the first page, I saw the handwriting. It was my own. The entries were dated, each one from a different year, but none of the dates made sense. 1903, 1947, 2012, ... mixed together. The writing shifted over time, more rushed, more fragmented, ... Still no birds. She said not to dig too deep. I didn't listen. The cabin moves when I sleep. Who is writing this? I think it's still me. My hands trembled as I turned to the last page. There, written in faint pencil, was a single line. "You are not the first version of yourself to come here." I closed the journal and sat in the damp earth for a long time. The forest didn't speak, it just waited. When I finally made it back to the cabin, something had changed. At first glance, everything was the same. The fireplace, the table, the bed, but the mirror by the door had moved. It now hung at a different angle, lower than before. And when I looked into it, I saw something strange. My reflection looked like me. Same face, same eyes, but behind me, in the glass, the window showed sunlight and snow. I turned. The real window behind me showed fog, but in the reflection, It was a different season, a different time. The forest was bare, and something small moved behind the trees, just out of frame. I reached out to touch the mirror, and felt warm breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, nothing, but on the floor by the fireplace, there was something new. ... A pine needle doll, small, carefully bound. Its head was wrapped in bark. ... Its arms were made of broken twigs, and one had been burned. I picked it up slowly. The moment I touched it, I remembered another name, Alira. It hit me like a rush of cold water. The name didn't belong to me, but I had whispered it once, in fear, or maybe in apology. I sat by the fire and held the doll gently in my hands. Somewhere, far in the trees, I thought I heard crying, soft, childlike, but it might have been wind. That night, I didn't light a fire. I let the darkness come, and I listened, not for danger, but for memory. In the middle of the night, the cabin door opened, slowly, quietly, like it had always been open. I didn't get up, I just watched. And through the mist, a figure stood at the threshold, not tall, not threatening. Small, wrapped in leaves. A child. She looked at me with wide, empty eyes. Not black, not white, just empty. She didn't speak, but I heard her voice in my mind, like the others. You left us here. I shook my head, but she continued. You were supposed to stay. She stepped forward, into the cabin. The fog came with her, filling the room slowly, curling around the table legs and the fireplace stones. She sat at the foot of the bed, and I felt no fear, only recognition. I whispered Alira. My voice cracked, and though she didn't move her lips, I heard, you were almost whole. Then she vanished. The fog faded, and I was alone again. I don't remember sleeping, but I woke with a heavy feeling in my chest, like I had wept in the night. The pine needle doll was gone, but in its place was a new item on the table. A small, old-fashioned key, tied with a thread of moss. ... I didn't know what it opened, but something deep inside me did. The forest outside was still. No birds, no wind, only the hush. I stepped out barefoot. The earth felt warm, welcoming. ... And I whispered, I'm ready. The forest did not respond with sound, but every tree leaned closer, as if listening, as if remembering. I stood at the edge of the trees for a long time, holding the key. I didn't know what it opened, but I could feel its weight in more than my hand. It pressed against something inside me, like a memory wanting to surface, but afraid of the light. The fog had pulled back slightly, only a little, enough to see a path I hadn't noticed before. Narrow, woven with old branches, half swallowed by the underbrush. It didn't feel new. It felt ancient, like something I'd carved into the land long ago, then forgotten. The forest no longer creaked. It listened. ... With every step, I felt the silence tighten. Not hostile, just watchful. I walked slowly. The air smelled like wet stone and old fire. There were markings on the trees now. Symbols, not words, just curved shapes, spirals and loops. Some glowed faintly under the mistlight. Some looked carved, others looked like they'd grown naturally into the bark, as if the forest itself had learned to write, and maybe it had. I came to a clearing. In the center was a stone well-low, moss-covered, filled with shadow. It was older than anything I'd seen. The stones were smooth, worn to the point of softness. The key in my hand began to feel warm. I approached the well slowly. There was no rope, no bucket, But as I peered in, I didn't see water. I saw a room beneath the earth, lit by candlelight, wooden walls, a bed, a chair, and on the floor, a shadow that moved like it was breathing. I dropped the key. It fell longer than it should have. I never heard it hit bottom, and then I remembered I had built that room. I don't know how I descended. The well opened like a tunnel, and I found myself stepping down old stone stairs, slick with moss and time. The air grew warmer, thicker. I reached the bottom and stood at the threshold of the room. It was exactly as I had seen it. A small wooden bed, blankets untouched, a desk covered in old maps, a candle burning, though I had no memory of lighting it. On the wall hung a mirror, dust covered. I wiped it with the sleeve of my coat, and in its reflection, I saw not myself, but all the selves I had been. A man in a different coat, a child holding a pine needle doll, an old woman with moss in her hair, a silhouette I didn't recognize, weeping softly with no sound. All of them watched me. None of them spoke. There was a journal on the desk. I opened it to the first page. This is not the first version of me, but it may be the last. I turned the page, and the writing was mine. Not just the handwriting, the thoughts, the fears. Each entry was like reading the voice in the back of my mind. She came again, Alira. Her eyes are full of fog. The cabin disappears when I try to leave. Maybe it's not a place. Maybe it's a shell like mine. He says I promised to stay, but I don't remember making the promise. I kept reading. Hours may have passed, or minutes. It didn't matter anymore. Time had become soft here, like a blanket pulled over the eyes. At the final page, there was a drawing. A tree, but its roots weren't in the ground. They were in a skull, and at the base of the tree was a name written in trembling ink, Tornen Elidame. And under that, this forest is not haunted. It is alive with what we left behind. I closed the book. The candle went out, and the room sighed. Yes, sighed, ... like a beast sleeping beneath my feet. And suddenly, I was not in the room anymore. I was back outside. The sky was darker now, though I didn't remember night falling. The forest was still, but a new path had opened, one lined with bones. Not human, not animal, just shapes, familiar and wrong. I walked the path anyway. Each step stirred the leaves in little bursts, like breath. Each tree I passed whispered my name, not aloud, but in memory. And then I reached it, the tree with no shadow. It stood at the highest point in the forest. I hadn't known there was a hill, but here it was tall, pale, its bark smooth like ivory. No branches, just a single, endless trunk. And at its base, a door, carved not with hands, but grown from the tree itself. A natural seal, and in the center, a keyhole. The same shape as the key I had dropped. And yet, the door opened at my touch. Inside was light, soft, golden, not sunlight, memory light. The walls pulsed gently, like breath, like heartbeats. And at the center of the chamber, a bed of moss, a mirror, and a figure. Not a person, not anymore. A shell of me. It looked like I had once, before the forest, before the forgetting. It was asleep or waiting. I stepped forward, and the figure opened its eyes. They weren't my eyes. They were all the eyes I had worn, in other versions, other times, other truths, and they looked at me with a calm I couldn't hold. They spoke in a voice like many voices overlapping. You left something here, and now you've returned for it. I tried to speak, but my voice stayed inside me. ... The figure lifted one hand bar-covered, yet still human. You will not leave again. I nodded ... and the forest breathed in. The chamber began to close, the walls pulsing slower. I sat beside the figure. We watched each other, not in fear, not in sadness, in completion. And then I lay down beside it and closed my eyes, felt roots brushing against my back, fingers of moss winding gently around my legs. The forest was claiming me, but not to destroy, to hold, to remember. And then I woke again. In the cabin, fire crackling, journal open, the pine needle door beside me. I sat up, everything was the same, and yet I knew something had changed. The mirror showed only me now. No others, no shadows, just peace. I stepped outside. The forest was still, but not silent. Birdsong ... A single, delicate trill from somewhere in the canopy. And I smiled, because I remembered now. Not everything, but enough. I would stay, not because I was trapped, but because this was where I began, and perhaps where I would always be. The trees rustled gently, like a lullaby, and the wind whispered the name I had almost forgotten, Alira, followed by one more, Thorn, and then you. I stepped into the fog one last time, and the forest closed softly behind me, like a story that had finished being told.